Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone who's joined us from across the world for a HFS webinar on accelerating and consolidating your cloud-native future. I'm Nishla Murthy Kaushik, VP and Chief Storyteller at HFS Research and your moderator for the day. Welcome you all for joining us today, and we appreciate you taking the time to tune into this session. Before we start, a few housekeeping points. All attendees are on mute during the session. However, we want to hear from you and we'd love to answer your questions at the end of the session. If you have a session, please do post it in the Q&A section, which is appearing on your Zoom window. One of our esteemed panelists will be sure to answer the question during the session or at the end of the session. So let's begin. A cloud-native future is increasingly a priority for organizations across the world. If that's the direction your organization is already on or plans to walk down in the future, it would be definitely worthwhile to have a structured and holistic approach to aid in the journey. And of course, to hear from the real-world experiences of other organizations who have walked down that path. To learn about an integrated approach to a cloud-native future, and listen to best practices from companies who embarked on the journey, we are happy to welcome you all to our webinar with speakers from HFS Research, Emphasis, and the Ardenau Group. I would now welcome each of the panelists to welcome themselves. Tom?
And now I'm muted, sorry about that. Thanks, Nishala. I'm Tom Reuner. I'm heading up HFS IT Services Research. And for us, IT Service is a whole gamut, literally for the topic at hand, that is cloud native, but then literally how clients are looking at apps modernization, equal measures, often forgotten quality assurance, and very close to my heart, IT automation and broader innovation IT automation discussions. Back to you, Nishala. Thanks.
Yesh, I would request now you to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Yesh Subramanian. I'm Seattle-based. I represent the digital and cloud aspects of Emphasis, and my entire team of solutioners, if you will, and architects focus on various aspects of cloud and how do we deploy, help our customers deploy cloud from all the way from apps, data, infrastructure, looking at the gamut of technology and the software issues around cloud so that we make the journey to the cloud successful. So that's my charter. Look forward to talking today.
Sure. Thank you so much, Yash. We're looking forward to hear your perspectives during this session. Over to you, Mark, if you may please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Nishala. My name's Mark Smith. I'm the Group IT and Change Director for the Ardenau Group. I'm accountable for the IT provision across the group. I am the person who either gets fired or goes to jail if it all goes terribly wrong.
Great. Joel, if you may please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joel Martin. I'm the VP responsible for cloud research here at HFS. My role is really to echo Yesh's. It's that journey that our customers are on, moving from their own world of IT infrastructure and architecture through digital transformation and into cloud native. And that's really around being able to bring the people, the processes, and the cultures together to drive innovation for the organization. And I'm excited about hearing more from Mark and Yesh and Tom today, and I'm glad everybody could join.
Sure. Thanks, Joel. I'm excited about hearing perspectives because we have a very diverse set of panelists who have a very diverse range of experiences. So I'm sure it's going to be an exciting conversation. Let's start with the basics. Let's hear from all of you on what is your understanding of a cloud native future. Tom, if you would please share your thoughts.
Thanks, Nishala. And I'm tempted to say the answer is pretty much a sneak preview of my presentation that we'll share with you in a moment. But having said that, for me, two things are really critical. First and foremost, it really is a journey, and a long and tough journey, and I hope Mark will attest to that in a moment. And we're really immensely grateful for clients like Martin, who will share his experience this way, because it's all about the lessons learned on that journey. The other crucial point is that it's really more about culture and people than it is about technology. But also addressing the elephant in the room. All too often, the marketing noise from the supply side is trying to portray quite a different picture to that. To them, everything is allegedly easier, less complex, while guaranteeing huge savings. We all know the story. However, what you're seeing across all flavors of cloud is the journey often starts with a cost focus, but crucially, it must not end with that. Rather, it should accelerate the progress toward value capture and innovation. And pretty much, I would tempted to say, we see that with the pandemic, and I'm sure we come back in the discussions to it. But it should be much more about the ability to deliver digitally. Again, the pandemic is probably the litmus test for that. But unfortunately, many organizations have been found wanting. Therefore, see the huge surge in cloud as people are not just experimenting with a plethora of providers, but rather focus on one or two hyperscalers and the ability to deliver end to end. But we see many clients starting the journey slightly myopic with just a focus on cost. Let's get rid of our data center, bring us cost savings, et cetera, et cetera. We hear time and time again. Yet often this is followed by the rude awakening when they realize they haven't put in the controls, the cost controls, the security controls, the overarching management controls. And I better stop here, more in a moment. But over to you. Yes, same question.
Yeah, then let me kind of give a perspective. So I'm coming from where we, as Emphasis, work with mostly financial services and logistics companies. Most of them are early adopters, but they're not, if you will, a Netflix. So they are in the journey, but into the journey reasonably sophisticated. So that's where I'm coming from. To me, cloud native and the future of cloud native is all about empowerment and entrepreneurship, if you will, making the org as a whole, and the customers in their own customers and end customers as well, entrepreneurial and empowered. So let me sort of explain three things I see. One, I'm observing that increasingly you're giving more sophisticated experiences to the customer and making them self-serve. The second thing is it's becoming data-driven, so the nature of sophistication also is more than just a lipstick on a pig. It's quite smart. And the third thing I'm observing is that this is a chance for IT and business to come together. You know, like a train track, they can actually start marching together. In fact, IT could get even ahead of business. This is a very interesting phenomenon I'm beginning to observe, where because you can kind of show and tell, you can innovate, you can do a lot of things. And if you think about it, the power is shifting to the developer. And that's got a lot of good things and a lot of complex things about it. So the developer sort of starts realizing, I am the CEO of my microservices. And therefore, I can do a lot of things. And therefore, there is a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of risk that needs to be mitigated. It's that milieu, to me, is what's very rich about cloud native. Is far beyond cost. It goes into all the things that was just mentioned by Tom in terms of innovation, in terms of protection and control. So there's both offense and defense, and I'll talk about that using a framework shortly.
That's great. Thanks, Yash. Mark, would like to hear from you as well on the same question.
Thanks, Nishala. So cloud native to me is fundamental to how I deliver my service proposition back to my customer base. And particularly in the last year, as we've gone through COVID, I've been exploiting cloud and our cloud footprint more and more. And I'll talk about that in my presentation. I think I'll be really honest with you. I think over the last year, our being cloud native has actually provided us with some huge competitive advantage. So back in February last year, when we first went from physical offices to remote working, and I turned the network inside out over a period of about 2 weeks. And actually, we managed to do that faster than the majority of our competitors. And that was noted in the marketplace. Thanks, Nishala.
That's wonderful. Would like to hear more about your journey as we move in the session. Joel, over to you, please.
Thank you, Nishala. Yeah, I mean, in our research and the conversations that I'm having on a daily basis, you know, native is really about value creation, bringing people, processes, and the cultures to bear that really drive more than just outcomes, but experiences for employees and customers that are better than they had before. that allow the organization to learn more dynamically and then to execute and meet the needs. And we've never seen that as forefront as we have over the past year. And as Mark's going to go into his presentation, that's what's really important and powerful about that journey to becoming cloud native. If I could echo what Yesh said, there's three things that I continually see. Cloud native is about providing the ability for your business and your customers to be innovative when that comes to their processes and how they get the job done for what their customers and partners are paying them to do. It's about allowing creativity to flourish. Combining the business smarts with the technology and developer smarts around that growing digital fluency so that your people can access the data, the analytics, the insights they need to have an impact on the business. And then finally, cloud native is very, very, much, it's fundamentally about creating technology wealth, not technology debt. And it's about having a vision for the future for your organization because you are capturing those inputs from the business, from the customers, and from your developers. So I'm really excited, and we're going to touch on a lot of those today. Back to you, Nishala.
That's great. Now that we've established some base understanding of what a cloud native future is, I think the question on everyone's mind is, as an organization starts their cloud native journey, is there a recommended approach to go about this? Tom, I'd request you to share your perspectives over here.
Thanks, Nishala. I think I happily convey or leave that to both Yesh and Martin later on. I think what I try to do in my part of the presentation is to provide the context for all those discussions, but literally just a context to set up with a more detailed and experience of both Yesh and Martin. With that in mind, and literally picking up on the questions, the journey towards cloud native, at least my view, is still largely ambition. But more than anything else, and just repeating myself, it's about culture, people, and process rather than tools and technologies. But how literally, from a painting with a big broad brush, how we should think about cloud. And Joel and I have animated a discussion about this as we are trying to map out our research coverage across all the permutations of cloud. And simply put, it touches pretty much everything we do as an industry, from infrastructure to apps to processes. And we just heard from both Yesh and Martin, all the way to new business model and value capture. So let's start with the context of all of that. And this slide we see in front of us is trying to highlight exactly that. It's depict what we call at HFS, the one office mindset. And many of you have heard us talking about it at length. It isn't just a different moniker for digital transformation, to be very clear about that. It's our narrative that organizations that have to collapse the front, middle, and back office while overcoming the silos of IT and business, but the equal measure to achieve truly digital experiences. This is all about outcomes. And those outcomes are not only customer experience, but in equal measure, if increasingly so, especially with COVID, employee experiences. But how do we really get to those unified experiences we're trying to achieve? And a core competency for progressing toward the one office is building out service delivery capabilities that enable organizations to automatically access, analyze, and store data to leverage dynamic workflows, as I would call it, across different domains and equally important across different organizational boundaries. And these capabilities really must surpass narrow RPA mindsets aiming to just ingest predominantly structured data to automate its strategies. It has to go far beyond that. Rather, process must consume unstructured data. Think about IoT, edge information, or even think about things like alerts for managing infrastructure applications. And in our view, AI really is a critical enabler for deriving meaning from all those data points. But equally, we have to progress to orchestrating and automating all these disparate workflows in order to be able to consume it. Having said all this, what it boils down to, that clouds get you to the target state and should eliminate all the silos as you move from the more dexterous, I'm tempted to call it data-driven thinking. This is quite a bit to digest and take in, but we will touch upon it while we move forward. And one thing probably taken away from my introductions, but also from the things that I just mentioned, it's a lot of complexity. Unfortunately, if you look at this slide, it's quite a busy slide, but I hope it literally reflects that complexity. I have adapted this slide from our friends at Container Solutions, who are literally at the vanguard of advising clients moving towards cloud native. And in a nutshell, what is it? It's a maturity model that helps to discuss and visualize where clients really are in their endeavors around cloud native. Thus, to navigate this, let me call out a couple of points that are important to us. And despite all the marketing noise that I mentioned, the crucial point is that not about the hype technologies, but about culture and people, again, almost sounding like a broken record here. But it's literally some of the key points is all the issues you can see on the left-hand side in bold. And the key part of our job here is HFS to provide realistic guidance where organizations are on their journey, be it towards cloud native or other models. So again, it's for me, the way in my little world, I think about analysts, it's our job to provide hopefully realistic guidance on that work. But having said all that, while the marketing will always point you to the right-hand side, so all the aspiration, all the ambition, often the reality is that most organizations are, for instance, stuck in waterfall, at best started to dabble with agility or agile. Again, if you want to move to cloud native, which is not just adapting a couple of technologies, it's about culture, we have to be mindful on that. But equally, it's not just about cost reduction or working anywhere, installing a couple of VPNs, as painful as it was with COVID. Rather, literally, it's about changing a mindset, retraining our organization around the culture, the people, training them on all those new methodologies and technologies. And just let me double click on a couple of issues to make it more tangible and hopefully more relevant for the ensuing discussion. And as you can see, these three issues are called out, don't mention cloud specifically, but what I meant to elaborate on is the context for all the cloud-specific thoughts that Yash and Martin will take us through. And the key element of distributed agile is to enable cross-functional teams. And of course, with the almost ambition to work better together. But again, it's so easy to state, and we were quipping earlier, it's so easy for us as analysts without having the operational responsibility. But if you have the operational responsibility, that's actually hard work, especially in the context of a complex arrangement like outsourcing. But fundamentally, it's aligned with the journey towards the one office and the whole intention to overcome those silos. Again, we need cross-functional teams to do that. But having said that, how do we organize the data, the workflows, and the ultimate execution of process step in such an environment? And this goes beyond just enabling agile. This goes at the heart of what I would call operationalizing the one office. And here we see a completely new ecosystem. Think about things like ServiceNow emerging. We're starting to see client commencing quite traditionally in an ITSM, but then take almost a single data model and dynamic workflows across procurement or even corporate legal. And this is literally what I meant about cross-functional workflow and this one office mindset, how we get across all that. And bingo, literally, that's the journey towards the one office being brought to life. And both IT operational management, other issues brings me to my next points. For organizations to progress their journey towards the one office, we literally need new approaches in terms of enterprise service management or even things like enterprise-wide service monitoring. All these approaches are still highly fragmented, but in order to make sense of all these new complexity, which you see here on this slide, we literally need new approaches which cut across the organization, which we haven't really seen as yet. But equally, we have to be clear what the bold statements of things like self-remediation or even self-healing mean. Broadly speaking, what we see in the market, that all these approaches, especially in the monitoring space, to a lesser degree on the service management side, are probably more around next back action rather than actually self-remediation or even self-healing, which is probably tip of the iceberg. But what we must work towards are literally autonomous ways of managing operations. And we will see us driving our research at HFS. Because for me, it's literally essential to, when you pick up the whole notion of the journey toward the one office, digital transformation, whatever you want to call it, we have to get at ways of managing all this complexity. So we can't deal with all the fragmentation and manual intervention anymore. We have to move on to different ways. The last point on this one, you have to be really clear what AI-driven product and service design really means. This has to be broader than just statistical machine learning models. One example from a recent discussion, for instance, Capgemini and others are experimenting with the digital twin concept to model complex process scenario. But also my personal experience of having spent the last 3 years with Virago, one of the innovative AI and automation companies, they have leveraged 20 years of basic research to provide unique process automation capabilities. All that's providing new, hopefully helpful insights, because we have to move beyond narrow concept, be it all the statistical approaches around RPA, and to some degree statistical models around machine learning. We have to advance from that. I spare you all the details. I could go on lengths to how we do get to non-deterministic ways of managing and automating all that. Just almost to close out, in summary, accelerating the journey towards cloud native is not just about partnering with hyperscalers or progressing with a couple of SaaS platforms like Salesforce or Workday. It's literally about culture and new ways of working and collaborating. On that note, I'm happy to pass on the baton to Yesh. Yesh, the floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. And let me build on this. If you would flip to the next slide, please. You can go to the next slide, actually. Yeah, if you look at this slide, it actually builds on where Tom left off. If you look at the last 2 columns of Tom, and they were talking about last 3 really, agile, cloud native, and next. I believe they map to 1, 2, and 3. So what I'm going to do is provide 2 frameworks. One is to look at it, if you will, journey-wise. The other is to look at it in a given state. What are the 3 dimensions that really seem to matter? And these are based on looking at various case studies and sort of abstracting out the insights. So what we observed from a journey point of view is that companies typically fall in one of 3 buckets. Most of them are moving from Cloud 1.0 to Cloud 2.0. If you look at 1.0, there's a serious cost focus. There's a mandate typically to the CIO. And what we are finding is there's a lot of choices in the market. SIs like ourselves simplify things. And Mark, one of our customers who's going to talk shortly, will give sort of an example of how those things actually come to bear. And that simplification is where the conversation is on: what do I prioritize? What do I do? How do I make cloud work? But as you go to Cloud 2.0, which is where we are talking about today, cloud native, you've sort of gone up the Maslowian hierarchy. You're beginning to latch on to things that we just mentioned among the 3 speakers today. You got Mark talking about competitive advantage. Then we had the comment about value creation. We had the comment about innovation. And we had the comment from me about empowerment. And then we had the whole idea of technology wealth. As opposed to technology debt. All of these become, I think, relevant in Cloud 2.0 because you're sort of up the Maslowian hierarchy. You're not at the top, which is 3.0, where you're sort of gone beyond the basics. Most of the born in the cloud companies are in Cloud 3.0, where you're thinking about big compute. How do I address some of the questions Tom just brought up about AI, beyond just then the ML algorithms? How do I focus on value in the next sense of the word, the blockchain aspects, the GPU, TPU sense is 3.0. But our lens today is really 2.0. And the 2.0 is all about how do I make it work in I think at least in 6 dimensions. There is 1, how do I deepen the offer to the end customer? Second, how do I hyper-personalize that offer? Third, how do I bundle those offers and services and shrink wrap them and offer them more broadly? Fourth becomes, how do I sort of scale this across multiple customers, multiple geographies, across the economics, the value equation? The 5th is offense, defense, which is how do I become more resilient while I'm doing all this offense? I can't be hacked into. I stay, resilient to all the changes. And very importantly, how do I manage this technology debt? I've got all this code. I've got to make sure that as I refactor, I rethink things, that things are being used efficiently. I'm not going 2 steps back, forward 3 steps back. All of these coexist in our opinion. And if we were to flip to the next slide, and the way sort of to think about this, in my opinion, as you sort of navigate through this morass of things and multiple parameters, are the 3 M's. You've got mindset, you've got mental models, and you've got matrices. And they situate themselves in this world that we're living in, where you've got to think about both offense and defense. Defense is resilience, offense is responsiveness. So just like a good soccer team, you got to know the ball is in the front of the field or in the back of the field and play the game. And both simultaneously, if you will, as in any given game. And the game is around pandemics, security hacks, obsolescence technology, debt, regulatory changes, particularly in financial services, M&A. So what happens, and this is very common now, what happens when two companies come together, and competitive threats. So cost becomes, if you will, a base level item. Is table stakes. You need to know how to sort of manage it, optimize, prioritize. But the next phase of this becomes relevant in a truly cloud native future. And allow me, if you go to the last slide in my deck, Tom, if you could click through. These are the sort of the double clicks, if you will, of each of those. Now take mindset, for example, right? Mindset really has in it the whole idea of empowerment. If cloud is empowering the organization, empowering the customer, and power at the edge, if you will, as you know, for example, even in this webinar, if you were to say walk away to get a cup of coffee, I know Teams does this, that it'll allow you to switch from one device to the other, and you seamlessly go to another device. And I wouldn't know that you did that. And assuming I can see you, those kinds of shifts are happening on a very tactical webinar through a much more sophisticated customer engagement basis. So you've got this mindset where we are seeing that starting with the ability to know the big picture, ability to know the various possibilities, understanding that the companies and customers are becoming entrepreneurial. There is a lot of things happening at the edge. What you need is really that beginner's mindset of seeing the whole picture, so you're not locally optimizing. There are many cases, like one of our cases, which I'll allude to, is one of the financial services organizations we work with. They're a large brokerage house as well. Had it all done, was all ready with everything in terms of monolithic applications moving to the cloud, microservices-based model, hybrid multi-cloud, domain-driven architecture. You got it, they thought it through. But this is where they hit the snag. They hit the snag where they found that business did not still understand where value was being created. Ops and security were not equipped to handle the pipeline. The CI/CD was broken. So they got caught in a what-if scenario. So if you don't have the sort of the end game in mind, we're finding that you can execute fast, get all the technology variables sorted out, but then you get stuck in a paralysis by analysis at the organizational level because you don't have either the end in mind shared, a Pareto approach. In this case, they even had the first few apps organized, but they still couldn't get it across the finish line. So there's and I'll give you a second example. One of our logistics customers had put in a charter saying, we need to think like Silicon Valley as a corporate mandate 2 years ago. It's taken 2 years, but every move they're making sort of mirrors this philosophy. So that's the mindset. That is the first variable. The second variable that I would look at is the mental model. The mental model is this offense defense. So you know where, so there's something called the Occam's razor, which is basically you take advantage where the fishes are, you go fishing where the fishes are. So one of the things that the cloud native allows is that ability to pivot and move fast. So therefore, companies are beginning to take advantage of this in the offense sense of the word, of moving capacity and capability where they see opportunity. And as Mark alluded to this earlier on, during the COVID pandemic, this became a really big competitive advantage. So this is that mental model that Mark will talk about in more depth. It sort of brings in that next generation experience. You're able to focus on innovation and on a defense sense, because as you go forward, you need to focus on your home. There's the other principle, which is called the Hanlon's razor, where you have the ability to quickly defend, Hanlon's razor, rather, I mispronounced that, quickly defend your turf. So if you think about security, audit, all the things that the cloud provides today, you're able to do this at a very granular level. You're able to have the entire audit trail available, and you're able to go, and the developer themselves can help you find, or their managers, where things went wrong and how you can systematically monitor. So this whole thing about managing the ecosystem, both offensively and defensively, managing it so that the silos are taken out, data is prevalent, you're able to audit, gives you that capacity to then take action, both pivoting in an opportunity sense and pivoting from a defense sense. So that mental model needs to also be looked at on how are you preparing to be cloud native both ways. And very closely related to that is the third piece, which is the metrics. Given it's all very granular, given there is accountability and given traceability and responsibility, you can start measuring key things. For example, one of our customers focused completely on mean time to recover and made sure using SRE, they were just optimizing the hell out of their website and their customer downtime trading on their web. It was significant amount of dollars. They said this is their Pareto problem. And it just focused very, very severely on MTTR as a measure. There are other customers who take on how do I not just focus on my CI/CD pipeline of getting products faster, but they measure specifically idea to product, product to production. You have very specific measures, and that's where technology debt particularly gets addressed. So you've got various matrices you can apply, which goes back to the larger point of value creation and competitive advantage. And all of this is possible because, in my opinion, cloud native allows you to get dirty and get your hands to all the data that drives decision. So it's a data-driven, evidence-driven organization. And that's why I use the word empowerment, because ultimately you can't fluff over things here. There is a very clear way to create an audit trail and a very clear way to say, did that decision work? The CMO in that example of where the SRE worked completely on MTTR was jubilant because the numbers showed on what was the downtime and how it was cut by 80% and what it meant for revenues. So there was no ambiguity between business and IT. And when I said business and IT sort of are coming now closer, in fact, like two lines of a rail line, but an IT can actually get ahead through show me and these matrices of their business stakeholder. So that in summary to me is how I have seen best to abstract out with these 3 M's to understand this culture variable. So I will stop with that. I'm going to introduce Mark, who can ground this with the real operational world examples that we've had the benefit of working with Mark over the year and enjoyed seeing what is possible. And Mark has pushed the envelope in many directions. Mark?
Thank you, Yesh. I'll pick up the pace. So if you go to the next slide, Nishala. Oh, I was going to introduce myself. No, one before. To the Ardonna Group.
Sorry, please continue.
I'm going to keep going. So I'm the Group IT and Change Director for the Ardonna Group. Although that sounds like I just sort of sit in an ivory tower and run the group stuff, I'm actually also the CIO for 2 of our 3 P&Ls. So I'm also responsible for our commercial lines brokerage and also our London market specialty businesses. We're an insurance broker, so we help our clients to either find the best insurance product for them, or if that doesn't exist, actually work with them and normally a portfolio of insurers to bespoke something that fits them neatly. A couple of examples. So we brokered the health insurance for a couple of the Northwest Premier League football teams. We also brokered the insurance for the Tokyo Olympics. So quite a diverse range of products and services. If you go to the next slide. So that's enough of the advert. So I want to pick up our cloud journey, and I'll use actually I quite like Yesh's version 1, version 2, version 3. And I'll use that to describe our cloud journey. So back in 2016, actually, the reason for us to move big time into cloud, and actually it's Azure, it's Microsoft Azure, was a complete commercial imperative. We had to move from an old supplier, which was running all of our kit in a data center, and shift to a new supplier who moved it into Azure. And actually, the day one transformation was quite minimal. I mean, we sort of took all the existing stuff, all the physical stuff, and put it in Azure. Yes, we did easy wins. So if we could do a bit of consolidation as we did it, or if we could switch a few things off, then that was good. The effect on our user base was actually quite profound, because we moved from what was physically set and stayed service provision to remarkable nimbleness in their eyes, and that's something you should not underestimate. You can make a massive service improvement by moving to cloud. Our day two transformation, once we'd got everything into Azure, was then focused actually on business system consolidation, and by that I mean the transactional systems that were used by each of our businesses to actually do their day-to-day client processing. And having got everything into Azure, it was very easy to spot how much of this was going on. You no longer had to go and turn up at the office and look in the cupboards to try and find what systems are being used. You could actually open up the Azure portal and find the blooming things. So we did an enormous amount of business system consolidation. Actually, we took out probably about 200 trading applications. And for my main broking business, that actually took us down to 2 target applications, which was a fantastic, both business process optimization, but also a fantastic end result for them. And we were also able to do on the group side, look at operational processes, and in particular things like cash processing, so all the finance processes. What was very difficult was infrastructure transformation. And that was because, and I'll talk about it on the next slide, but that was because we took what was a physical structure, a physical architecture, and we moved it into Azure. And in many ways, we mirrored what was a very physical representation of our infrastructure, and in particular around telephony and some very bespoke legacy applications. What that meant was that gradually over time, the anchor that started to weigh us down was all around tech debt. And it was very difficult to address that. The screws on the doors, I had almost 1,000 servers in Azure. I was left with just over 100 odd that were on-prem. And out of that batch, just under half actually had some sort of tech debt problem with them. So I shift to our second phase of our cloud journey was driven by that tech debt. It became increasingly critical that was resolved, and that was holding back not just continuing business transformation, but actually started to hold back business operation, actual day-to-day operation. And what that needed in particular from the technology team was to change our mindset. Something that Yesh picked up on, and that was to shift from this idea that what we'd done was virtualized a physical structure to actually view it through cloud-centric eyes. Now, I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. In doing that, we were actually able to then address our tech debt problem by looking at it laterally by tech stack. So what does that mean? What that means is instead of having to go office by office to identify which applications needed upgrading, I could actually look across the estate, see what was running Windows 2003, which had gone into service, and figure out how many of those, how I was going to go about upgrading those. Actually, it was about 110 servers and about 3,000 databases. And then to sequence with the business exactly when was the best time to do that and cause them the least amount of disruption. And also I could explain to them why it had to be done. So that was enormously beneficial. I was also able to leverage some native cloud services, some things that you get along with your cloud subscription, and in particular around backup and analytics. So I could exploit the what is the BAU backup service in Azure, rather than, again, having people running around loading tapes, which they were doing in a couple of the data centers before we shifted them. I could also move to dynamic servicing. So I use Citrix as my example. I used to have, actually, as we came through COVID, I ended up with almost 80 Citrix servers to provide half of my remote service. And I had to, in the old world, you had to switch them on and leave them on. In the new world, actually, when they're not used, they can shrink down to nothing. So again, a real dynamic service provisioning. And you think, well, that sounds pretty cute, but what does that mean? Well, I was spending about 80 grand a month on Citrix servers. So actually being able to shrink that down every time it wasn't being used gave us a tremendous financial imperative. And then finally, the shift to metrics. And again, Yesh mentioned this. This has been a real boon through COVID. So rather than just showing how many people I've got logged onto the network and how many people have got are using particular applications, what I can now do, again through exploiting the Azure metrics, is I can start to show when people were on the network, how many transactions they were doing, how many phone calls they were making, and when they were making those phone calls. And what that enables us to do is identify who's actually doing really well at this new virtual remote working. How is it that they've changed the way that they operate, and then share that around so that we can get the benefit for everybody. Again, a huge win for us. And right now I've actually got rid of most of the on-prem. All that's left at the moment, I think, are my Skype for Business servers, which will disappear in July when I move to Teams. And my tech debt is gone, actually, which is fantastic. If you go to the next slide, Nishala. So there's some huge benefits. There have been some huge benefits in just going, from version 1 to version 2. So version 1, we had on the left, we had this old view, this old mindset that actually when the technologists thought about the network, what they actually imagined in their mind's eye was a virtualization of the physical world. It was just all hyper-connected. And so when it came to trying to figure out how we could do things differently, it was enormously difficult. The way we're now viewing it is, in a cloud-centric world, is that actually we can view it as logically segregated and almost present back to the business as if they had, for each their individual business units, their own network. And that enables us to show not just how the services line up and how we actually help them in transacting business and going to market, but it also means I can give complete line of sight to the assets that they're using, to the costs that they're incurring, and to the resilience of the service that's actually being provided. It also makes it more secure, because I can secure the segregated zone, and each of the zones sits within a common perimeter, and I can secure that, and I have secured the perimeter. I can secure the perimeter. The perimeter is hardened, so we get better security and better resilience, and this step improvement in cost accountability. So we've gone from being, last business year we were a allocation out from group across to the businesses, and this year I can actually show where those costs are being incurred and which businesses are cost heavy on IT and which businesses are not, which again really helps both with the in terms of driving better performance and better efficiency, but is also incredibly useful when we're on the acquisition trail. Nishala, if you just go to the next slide. So how do I see, what's the next step? What's step 3? Well, we're starting to now nibble at starting to see what version 3 looks like, I think. The first thing is that the cloud services, both the compute, storage, and cloud services that are available, I can view increasingly as commodities. So they have a price, they have a performance, and actually there's not, I don't know whether we've got any Microsoft or Amazon people on, but there's not that much difference in cost between the various providers. So you can actually start to view them as commodities. The key things that start to deliver value for me are all around identity management and automation. Identity management is phenomenally important. And as I've got, well, I've probably got about 5,000 end users, but I've also got probably a couple of hundred service accounts, a couple of thousand mailbox accounts. I've got a couple of hundred infrastructure engineers wandering across the network. So identity management becomes incredibly important as they all wander around I think it's about 80 plus business applications and around about 60 infrastructure applications. So just tracking that and making sure only the right people are doing the right stuff is really important, and also helps with that continuing optimization of the service provision. And then this push button automation. And this, I think, has real value and is something that just isn't possible in the physical world. And that's, I've popped it on the right-hand side. I've gone from thinking about Office in a box for acquisitions to business in a box. So when we land a new business unit, what I used to say to them was, don't worry, we will give you a couple of cloud servers, move you onto our Office 365 account, put a circuit into put one of our circuits into your office, and you've got Office in a box. You're good to go on day one. I think what we're now nibbling at is this business in a box, where not only do you get all of your services, but actually I can package all the applications as well at the same time. So day one, we can hit the ground running. I think, Michelle, I'm going to stop there so that we've got 15 minutes of questions. I think the version 1, a very real commercial imperative. Version 2, start to exploit a different paradigm, a different way of viewing the network, and that's really important, getting that mindset right with the technologists. And then Cloud 3, you can use your imagination, as we're starting to do. Thanks, Nishala.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Yash. Thank you, Tom. I think that was a great sort of perspective that we got to hear from all of you on a context of how to approach or look at cloud native as a journey, a sort of real world example or a framework or an approach, if you will, on how to take the journey forward, and listen to a live case study of how things have transformed by embarking on this journey. I'd like to just end with one last question for all of you before we open it up for the Q&A. Any perspectives or insights that you have on what organization skills are important as companies walk down this path? So Tom, probably a quick perspective from you before we move forward with the other panelists.
No, thanks, Nishala. And I'm just looking at the questions coming in. I think a lot of the questions asking both. I think the early question you might have seen on the role of developer, but also on the last one, literally how we drive literally the change management. Is a program management, literally how we drive change within the organization. I'm tempted almost literally to hand that over to both Yash and in particular to Mark, because for me, when I talk to customer, and then our customers are both on the supply and the buy side, I think on the buy side, it's literally this big necessity to drive change. I think Mark took us on a wonderful journey, rich journey, talked a lot of technology implication, but I think probably goes deeper, and would love to hear from Mark on that. And conversely, on the side, on Yash side, on the supply side, I think the biggest thing is literally how to retrain your workforce and all these new technologies. If you have especially organization with a more mature workforce, how do you literally go about retraining vast sets of your talent to deal with all that? That's almost a tap of my mind, but I'm happily come back to that and pose those questions back to both Yash and Mark. Thank you, each other.
Yash, if you may please weigh in here.
Yeah, so let me speak from an organizational as a system integrator point of view, and then I think Mark can better comment on from a practitioner from an enterprise point of view, including some of the two questions which are still open, which I think will be in that category. From a skills point of view, I see that it's very important that an organization focus, and I think this would apply to both an SI like myself, and an enterprise is you've got the breadth of skills where there's a broad array of people who are trained and aware of the language of cloud, the interoperability between the clouds, and you're able to speak multiple languages. Just like in Europe, you're speaking French, Italian, and Spanish. Those are the 3 different clouds. They may all come from Latin, but you need to be able to speak those languages to survive in the street. In the same way, learning to speak 3 or 4 different cloud platform languages, I think, is important. Specialization is becoming key because there's great amount of specialization on app level, data level, IoT level, and infra level. And I'm more app focused, and I've just spent a lot of time going deeper on the app side, just on AWS, and I can't even keep up. And I'm not even a developer. I'm focused on our strategy and our solutioning, but I can imagine the amount of, if you will, amount of development that's going on any one of these platforms is incredible. So I think having specialists becomes key. The third thing is, given the empowerment of the front lines, their understanding of the organizational implications of what they're doing, so they're no longer working in a silo. What they do affects the CMO, affects the CIO. So how does the little tweak down there affect the entire value chain becomes extremely critical to understand. So you no longer can afford to just have a technocentric view. And the fourth one, obviously, which Mark alluded to, is from a IT point of view, there's a lot of sophistication required in terms of identity and access management and billing and metering, because there's a lot of control that you can now exert on who pays for what, because you can see, and who's accountable for what, and which department should pay for it. So there's a lot of work there as well. So these are the things I am thinking about as we look at it from a system integrator point of view.
Thanks, Yash. Mark, any comments from your side as a company who's walked down that path?
Sure, I'll pick up both those topics. So that I think is a question about developers, and then on capabilities. On developers, 2 things on developers, on the developer community. One, cloud represents a fantastic opportunity for them, which they love. Actually, my developer, I've run several development teams in my function, and it's a fantastic opportunity for both collaboration, for pulling in using external resources, external databases, external assets, creating your own APIs. I mean, it's a developer's dream, actually. It's also fantastic for being able to quickly spin up and create proof of concepts and test cases to actually demonstrate what it is you're talking about. So actually, it's fabulous for the agile guys, for the agilistas, and because it really lends itself to agile. So my developers have loved it. They've loved the journey, and each time we bring in a new development team from one of the businesses we acquire, shifting them into cloud is transformational for them in their professional capacity, and they love it. That's the huge positive for the developers. On the downside, I have to give them a really serious talking to, because with all of that extra opportunity, I need them to actually be disciplined and rigorous in how they exploit those opportunities. I've run development teams for a long time. Developers are really smart, and you can do loads of things within a cloud architecture. And it's difficult for those of you who've managed developers. It's difficult to control developers, particularly digital developers. I'd rather not. I'd rather they were disciplined and rigorous in how they did stuff. And unfortunately, so that's the deal I do with them. So I will give them great opportunity. I just need them in return to be more disciplined than they would usually be. And I have to warn them that if they're not disciplined, I will be able to tell. So it has a bit of teeth to it. On capabilities, I think I actually think, on the technology side, I don't think the meek will inherit the earth. I think the architects will. I think the the role of the enterprise architect and the role of the architecture team becomes very important in a cloud native tech organization. And again, it's something like the developers, it's something they love because it gives them so much more flexibility in how they do stuff. So the role of architects becomes much more important, and actually becomes much more important to have that inside your own organization. The days of having somebody else being your architecture team, I think that's a mistake when you're running a cloud organization, because you need that knowledge inside your own organization. And the other area that I see a big change is actually, interestingly, is in my change organization, in my both business change and IT change, tech change. And for them, it's about narrowing down options for the business leaders so that they can understand the propositions we're making. So rather than giving them a sliding scale of stuff we can do, we have to coalesce that into options and scenarios that they can make a judgment on. And cloud is really good for us. Like I said, it enables us to produce proof of concepts and points of view very, very quickly. And it's our job to make those real so that we can actually make design decisions and then get on with making the changes. Again, that's a real interesting set of extra capabilities for the change team.
Well, thanks, Mark. It's great input. I would love to get my colleague Joel in. Joel, we have a lot of discussion on this topic, so I'm just trying to pick your brain. In the end, how should we think? We heard a lot from Mark around how he evolved, the way he brought in metrics and got a much better handle on it. But how should we think about value capture? But in your view, even beyond the specifics, what should be the ultimate end goal of clients' journey around cloud? Is anything you could share with us?
Sure. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, there's so much to unpack in this conversation. I wish we had another hour. There's when I look at it, at the end of the day, we're in business to generate revenues and deliver value to our customers. And if I was to think about the biggest challenge facing most companies, are first and foremost, their leadership. We're talking about a decade where leaders, I think, are going to be challenged more than ever before, because they're dealing with new types of people. I mean, we're talking about your gig workers and your knowledge workers and your developers all coming together to innovate and create value for the organization and those that it serves more than ever before. And Mark's talked a lot about that. The workforce coming out of the pandemic is also fundamentally changing about people are working from everywhere. So dealing with what that means for your organization's ability to recruit, retain, and promote talent. And then that very topic that Mark was just talking about in architecture. And I think that's the biggest one, to look at the value chain, because now you're talking about, a fundamental shift in your organization from bring your own device to bring your own platform. Because of this shift in people in the workforce, you have to architect an environment that takes into consideration what people are using to work on the device itself, what data and software and applications they're using, how is that intersecting with their processes, and how are these being enabled with the cloud? And then how is the risk and governance being painted across that? So there's a lot of things there. And quite honestly, most leaders in our organizations don't understand that very bit. And that's where, really your technology partners and your leaders like Mark should be stepping up and providing that kind of guidance. Because to Tom's point, if we're talking about long-term value to the organization, it's bringing your leader into and educating them on how they're going to be successful in the journey that Yesh pointed to, is going from cloud 1 to cloud 2 to cloud 3, because the real value there is unleashing the power of your people to deliver better services than your competitors are doing, to innovate at the edge as well as at the core, and fundamentally to be willing to fail. And I think that's something that I really took from Mark's earlier conversation. He spearheaded that, but he also owned the risk that he was going to take on, and he held himself, but also his team and the business accountable for what they needed to do to really adapt to the new environment they faced, but also grab that technology debt and think about what they were going to do to create technology wealth for the long term. And that's where it's all going to drive. And again, we could go into a lot of nuances around this, but we don't have time. So I'll hand it back to you, Tom.
Great, Joel. Thanks for the insights, and we continue the discussion because, quite frankly, we haven't figured it out. We need all the insights from both clients like Mark doing almost a tough journey, but equally from Yash's side on the supply side. As we're coming almost literally up to the top of the hour, but it's such a rich discussion. But perhaps I could ask Mark one question that was core or key on my mind. While almost you provided with all the wealth of the insights of your journey, but with the wisdom of hindsight, if you would almost start the journey all over again, what are the key learnings you had, or put it the other way, what are the things you would do differently with the knowledge you have now, having been through all this journey? Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, probably don't get distracted and get the basics right. That would be my.
Could you just elaborate a little bit more? What do you mean?
We got the
questions, literally the challenges. I think that might help around those questions. Well, could you elaborate a little bit? But really the basics for others almost they could fit with your insight because you've been there.
I think the sure, Tom. So that we got distracted by the ease with which we could simplify our business applications. And that was a good, easy first win. But actually, we should have I wish we'd have spent more time thinking about getting the infrastructure right as we were doing that. But it was such a, hindsight's a wonderful thing. It was a massive win for us and a massive win for the business, getting the business application simplified down. But actually what I was doing was creating a bow wave of infrastructure tech debt. And I think if I'd known that, I would have attempted to try and address some of it along the way rather than sticking it all in the too difficult pile and coming to it at the end.
No, great insight, Mark. And I think probably a good point of closing. Really enjoyed the discussion. This is why it's much love my job listening to people. I think we were quipping beforehand. The analysts, for us, it's easy to postulate or even pontificate at times, but it's hard for practitioners, Mark Mars, who have all the operational responsibility. So we might be ridiculed. Mark literally might end up in prison. So it's the difference between both worlds. Both Mark, yes, big thank you for all your insights. My colleague Nishala and Joel for all their contributions. And most importantly, we all would love to continue those discussions where we answered some of your questions already in the chat. We will follow up on some of those, but please do reach out to all of us. Again, it's all about continuing those discussions and learning from each other. So big thank you and wish you a wonderful evening. And most importantly, you stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.